In this video, I will show you how A records are created. A quick reminder, A records are the most common DNS resource records. It contains the name of the host and its corresponding IP address. First, let's open the DNS manager. On the left panel of the DNS manager, there is the DNS node at the top, and just below it, you have the DNS server. Here, I just have one DNS server. In case I have many DNS servers, I will see all of them under the DNS node. And just under the DNS server, I have the DNS zones. The two mainly zones type you are going to work with a lot are the forward lookup zones and the reverse lookup zones. Reverse lookup zones are usually manually created and not always exist in every implementation. To display the resource records, click on the forward lookup zones, then on the corp.zintech.com zone. On the right panel is displayed the different resource records. As you can see, most of the records are A records that matches the host name with its corresponding IP address. What you can notice is that some A records reflects the host name, and some few others have this name, same as parent folder, between brackets. This means that this type of records represents the DNS server itself. Now, let's see how A records are created. I am going to take this host record for the demonstration. First, I will delete the record by the host itself. Usually, when the IP address is assigned to the host, the A record is created on the DNS server. Let's open a session on this Windows 10 box. Now I will open a command prompt and type ipconfig/renew to ask DHCP server for an IP address. The command has completed successfully. I will switch back to the DNS server and see if the A record for that computer has been created. I need to refresh the view to see any change. And you can see that the A record has been dynamically created. But there is a condition to be met in order that the A records will be created dynamically. Let's switch to the Windows 10 workstation to see that. I need to open the network interface properties. Click on the Internet Protocol version 4 and click on the Properties button. Next, click on the Advanced button. Click on the DNS panel. Here is the condition. This checkbox, register these connections addresses in DNS, must be checked. Otherwise, the A record will not be created. This checkbox is enabled by default. So if you search for a host record in your DNS server and don't find it, start by verifying if this checkbox is enabled. Now let's do a test and see what happens if this checkbox is not enabled. First, I will delete the A record from the DNS server. Okay, I will switch back to the Windows 10 workstation and disable the checkbox. Okay, close. Now I will ask for renewing the IP address. Now that the IP has been attributed by the DHCP, let's see if the A record has been created. Let's refresh the view. You can clearly see that the A record has not been created. Remember that if the A record is missing, you can't reach the host by using its DNS name. Let's do a quick test. I will issue a ping command against the Windows 10 host. Surprisingly, there is an answer, where it shouldn't be the case logically. The explanation for that resides in one word, the DNS cache. To answer clients' queries quickly, the DNS server uses a cache. This cache is refreshed periodically. So I will empty this cache to reflect the actual DNS config. Now, if I run the ping command again, this time the ping couldn't find the host because the host A record is missing. Alright, we have seen in the first part of this video how the A records are dynamically created. A records can also be created manually. Manually adding A records can be useful in case you have some network devices that cannot dynamically create their own DNS records. For example, printers. If you need to refer to your printers by their DNS names instead of IP addresses, you need to manually create the corresponding A records. To manually create a host A record, just right-click and click on the new host entry in the context menu. In the name zone, type the name you want to give to the A record. Let's just copy the Windows 10 hostname from the command prompt. Next, I need to type the host IP address. I click on Added Host button, and the host record is successfully created. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. How to create an alias record. This is what you are going to learn in this video. A quick reminder, a CNAME alias record allows you to provide an alternate name to an existing host record. For example, you want to give your file server a name you can remember easier instead of the complicated host name. So you create an alias record and give it, for example, the following name, files. It will be easier for you to remember this alias name when you need to access your file server. To create an alias CNAME record, open the DNS Manager. Then select your domain zone under the forward lookup zone. On the right panel, just right-click to display the context menu. Then click on New Alias CNAME entry. In the first text zone, I will type my alias name. Files. In the fully qualified domain name zone, I must enter the name of the host referred by the alias. I will just browse and search for the host name. Here is my file server. I will select it and validate. My alias is now created and is referring to my file server with this fully qualified domain name. Now let's do a test. I'm going to switch to the Windows 10 box right here and try to reach my file server using the alias name. I will just type ping followed by the alias name, files, and I get a reply from my file server. Another test I am going to do is connecting a mapped network drive to a shared folder located on the file server. My drive letter will be Z, and I select the shared folder. Notice that I am using here the alias name to refer to my file server. I click Finish to validate. You can see that the mapped drive has been created. Okay? What I'm going to do now is to change the file server name and see how this will impact the configuration I set for mapping the network drive. One of the benefits of using alias names is that it will avoid me to do changes on every machine that refer to the host which I changed the name. So for example, if I use the file server host name instead of the alias to map network drives on 100 workstations, when the file server name changes, I must go on each workstation and map the network drive using the new file server name. I let you imagine the task. So, enough talking. I will switch to the file server, click on local server, click on computer name. I click on the change button. Let's say I will change the two first letters. I will replace DZ by US. Okay. I'm asked to enter the admin credentials to perform these operations. Now I must restart the computer to reflect the changes. Now that the file server has restarted, I will switch to the DNS server to make changes on the alias name parameters. First, I will refresh the view to make sure that the new file server name has been registered on the DNS server. Yes, it has been registered. But the alias name is still referring to the old file server name. I need to change that manually. So I am going to double click on the alias record and put the new file server name here. I will just browse and select the file server. Okay. And now the alias is referring to the correct file server name. So now I am going on the Windows 10 machine to check if the file server name change has any impact on my config. Let's start by a ping test. First, I need to empty the cache to be sure I am dealing with the recent DNS data. Let's issue the ping command. and I get a reply from the file server with the new hostname. Manually add it that if you need to and first their own I am has any impact on my config. Check if the file
Hello, and a good day to you. In this video, let's have a look at how to share 16. It also applies to server. We've created the shared shares, and while it is basically as Ninja, visible folder is a little bit different. And I'm sure you're guessing what's happening. Okay. In 2016, it's changed a little bit. Pinned over here, or it would be a start. Okay. Go to File and Storage, Shares. And then you can click there if there's nothing set up, otherwise it's in tasks. Okay, very simple. Okay, because we're not creating a new shared system, etc. Okay, it was in shared. Okay, So by ticking this, for those even the users to be when access simple, the 3 basic users, admin 4 is no problem. Okay, the properties of it, you can go to and now their screen. Have the netset king as given to one folder, and everything should have for a while, maybe a reboot, etc. And then
to create and manage group policies objects, you are going to use the Group Policy Management tool. To open the Group Policy Management tool, go to the Server Manager console, open the Tools menu, then click on Group Policy Management. In the GPM console, expand your forest name from the navigational tree on the left. Also expand the domain node, then your domain name. Inside, there are organizational units beside other containers. Organizational units are where you are going to link the GPOs you are going to create most of the time. You have to know that you can link a GPU to a site, a domain, and to an organizational unit. Just under your domain name, you have the default domain policy. The default domain policy object is created automatically when you create your domain by promoting your server to a domain controller. A second policy object called default domain controllers policy is created the same way. You find both of them inside the group policy objects container. It contains all the GPOs created in your domain. The default domain policy has the precedence over all the other GPOs, and it applies to all users and computers in the domain. Usually, it's used to manage default settings, such as the password policy. It's a commonplace for organizations to define security rules that need to apply to everyone. On the other hand, the default domain controller policy applies to all domain controllers in the domain controllers container. Now, let's see the different GPU views and options available for administrators to manage their group policies. When you click on a GPU, you have different panels at the right. The first one is the scope. The scope shows where the GPU is linked. As we said earlier, a GPU can be linked to a site, a domain, and to an organizational unit. A GPU can also be linked to more than one place at the same time. For example, you can link a GPU to two organizational units. The security filtering zone is where you define the groups of users and computers to which the settings of the GPU applies. In the case of the default domain policy, the GPU settings apply to all authenticated users in the domain. If you want to restrict the application of the GPU to a group of users or computers, you click on the Added button and select the user or computer group. In the Details panel, you have the domain name under which the GPU is created. The owner is the user or the users group who created the GPU. You have the creation and the modification date and time, the different GPU's versions, the unique GPU identifier, and here you have the GPU status. A GPU has a status enabled when you create it. You can also disable it, and you have choices. You can disable all the settings, or just the configuration computer settings, or just the user configuration settings. The Settings panel displays the configuration settings applicable to the selected GPU. In the case of the default domain policy, we have only the computer configuration that is defined. The user configuration is not defined. To see the configuration details, navigate to the last subsection and click on the Show button to expand the hidden lines. As you can see, there are many configuration settings related to the security policy. If I click on the password policy, I will see the configuration details. These are the password policy applied to all the domain users. You have the password history, the maximum and the minimum password age, the minimum password length, and so forth. The delegation panel lists the user's permissions on the GPU. For example, the authenticated users group has read permission on the GPU. This is enough to allow the users group to read the GPU settings and apply them. You rarely need to change the permissions, except when you are troubleshooting your GPU. If, for example, you suspect that the GPU is not behaving as expected, you can deny the read access to the group of users. This way, the GPU will not apply to those users. To do that, click on the Advanced button, select the users group, then change the read permission from allow to deny. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching. In this video, I am going to show you how to create and link a GPU. First, a quick reminder. A GPU is a set of settings and configuration you can apply to either computers or users. A GPU contains two main configuration sections: computer configuration and user configuration. Some new system administrators can get confused about user configuration and computer configuration. What is the difference between the two? Computer configuration in a GPU applies to computers, regardless of who logs on to the computer. On the other hand, user configuration applies to users, regardless of which computer they log onto. Okay, let's take an example to better understand. Imagine you want to deny access to Internet Explorer browser to John Smith on all computers in the organization. In this case, you are going to set the appropriate settings in the GPU user configuration section, so that whenever John opens a session on any computer, the settings will apply, preventing him from running Internet Explorer. On the other hand, if you want John not to be allowed to run Internet Explorer on his computer only, you set the appropriate settings in the computer settings section and apply the GPU to John's computer. Don't worry if you are still confused, I am going to show you that through a demo. First, I am going to open the Group Policy Management console. Now, the question I may ask is where I am going to create and link the GPU. As I want to prevent John Smith from running Internet Explorer, and as John Smith is part of the marketing organizational unit, so this is where I am going to link my GPU. I right-click on the marketing organizational unit, then click on Create a GPU in this domain and link it here. I have to give my GPU a name. Let's name it Disable IE. Click OK. My GPU has been created and added to the Group Policy Objects group. And if I expand the marketing organizational unit, you can see that my GPU is linked to that organizational unit. Now I am going to add the settings to the GPU. I right-click on the GPU, then I click on Edit. In the first example, I am going to prevent the user John Smith from running Internet Explorer on all computers of the organization. In this case, I will set the user configuration settings. I will expand the policies, then administrative templates, and click on System. The policy I am going to set is called Don't Run Specified Windows Applications. I double-click on the policy to display the settings. First, I will enable the policy. In the List of Disallowed Applications section, I will click on the Show button. Then I will type the executable file name of Internet Explorer, which is iexplore.exe. OK. OK. Now the policy is set enabled. The next step consists of defining the filter to apply. I have to explicitly tell the GPU to apply the settings to only John Smith. Otherwise, the settings will apply to all users under the marketing organizational unit. I will do that in the main Group Policy Management console. I click on the GPU. In the security filtering area, I am going to add the user John Smith. Now I have to remove the authenticated users group from the security filter. This way, the GPU settings will apply only to John Smith. Now let's do a test and see if the GPU works. I'm going to switch to the Windows 10 workstation. I have already opened the John Smith session. Let's run Internet Explorer. Surprisingly, Internet Explorer still ran under John Smith session. In reality, this is not surprising because the GPU settings are refreshed every 90 minutes. If you don't want to wait 90 minutes, you can force the GPU to update. To do that, open the command prompt. Then type gp update/force. This command will force the GPUs to update. Now let's do another test. And it still works. Why? The answer is GPU security reinforcement applied by Microsoft after security vulnerability was discovered. It allows an attacker to intercept traffic exchanged between a domain controller and a workstation. To apply the GPU, you need to explicitly add the authenticated users group with read permissions on the GPU. So let's do that. From the delegation panel, I will click on the Added button. Then add the authenticated users group. Click OK. In the next window, make sure the permissions are set to read. OK. Let's do another test. First, I need to force the GPU update. Let's open Internet Explorer now. And you can see that Internet Explorer is not opening anymore. Finally, our GPU works. That's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching. In the previous video, we have seen how to create and link a GPU. We took as an example the creation of a GPU that prevents specific user from running Internet Explorer on any computer that he logs on. We have set the user configuration of the GPU to achieve that. In this video, we are going to create a GPU that prevents any user from running Internet Explorer from a specific computer. We are going to set the GPU computer configuration to achieve that. Actually, I am in the John Smith session. I have deleted the previous GPU, so he can rerun in Internet Explorer. Let's check that. It works. Now let's create the GPU. The previous GPU we created was under the marketing organizational unit because we want to apply the GPU to John Smith, which is part of the marketing organizational unit. The GPU we are going to create applies to a computer. The question that arises is where I am going to link the new GPU. John Smith computer is not located under the marketing organizational unit. You can see that in this course you in the Active Directory Administrative Center. Under the Marketing Organizational Unit, we have only users' accounts, no computer. Computers objects are by default located under the computers container, which is not visible in the group policy console. To answer the question where to link the GPU, I have to consider two options. Number one, I can create an organizational unit and put in there the computer or computers I want to apply the GPU to. Number two, I create and link my GPU under the domain name. By doing so, the GPU will apply to all computers in the domain. To specifically target a computer or a computer's group, I need to apply a filter. So let's do that. I right-click on the domain name, and in the context menu, I will select Create a GPU in this domain and link it here. I will name my GPU Disable IE. Click OK. My GPU is now created and is visible under the Group Policy Objects container. You can also see that it is linked to the domain corp.zintech.com. Now I am going to edit the GPU to set the configuration. Under the Computer Configuration, expand Policies. Expand Windows Settings. Then Security Settings. Let's enlarge the console window to have a better view. The settings I am going to set are under Software Restriction Policies. When you click on for the first time, it displays a message that there is no software restriction policy defined in this group. To create a new software restriction policy, I right-click and select New Software Restriction Policies. Now it's created. To prevent users from running Internet Explorer, I will create my policy under Additional Rules container. Next, I have to set the path that contains the Internet Explorer executable file. I select a new path rule from the context menu. In the path field, I have to enter the path name. I'm going to copy that. Here is the executable name. Let's copy the path name, Ctrl-C, and paste. Under the security level drop box, I have to choose the action to apply. I will choose Disallow. OK. The policy is created and the appropriate action is applied. Now I am going to switch to the Windows 10 VM, where I have already opened the John Smith session. First, I need to force the GPU by running gpupdate/force command. Let's do a test. You can see the Internet Explorer window appears briefly, then closes. Let's do it again to be sure. Yes, definitely my GPU works. What I am going to do now is to open Jane Doe's session and see if the GPU will apply to her also. The GPU is supposed to apply to the computer regardless of the user that opens a session. I will click on the Internet Explorer icon and I get the same result. So my GPU works as expected. But I miss one parameter. If I apply this GPU as it is, all the computers in the domain will be affected. To restrict the application of the GPU to only this computer, I have to apply a filter. I'm going to switch to the Domain Controller VM, go to the main Group Policy Management console, and in the Security Filtering area, I will add the computer. Click on the Advanced button. Click on the Object Types button. The computer's object is not selected by default, so I will uncheck all the other objects except computers. Click Find Now button to list all the domain computers. I will select the computer in which I am interested. I don't need the authenticated users group in my filter, so I will remove them. Now my GPU will apply to only this computer, even if it is linked under the domain. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. In this video, we are going to play a little bit with GPUs. We will see how to rename a GPU, how to link a GPU and how to delete a GPU. The first time you create a GPU, you give it a name. But over time, you may think that this name is not appropriate and you want to change it. Let's take the example of the GPU Disable IE I created earlier. I want to change this name to a more explicit one. I will name my GPU Disable Internet Explorer. To do that, I will right-click on the GPU icon and click on Rename. Then rename my GPU. You can see that the GPU name has changed everywhere the GPU is linked. Suppose now that the head of the marketing department asks you to no more prevent his users from running Internet Explorer. In this case, you have two options. The first one is to unlink the GPU from the marketing organizational unit. I right-click on the GPU and uncheck the Link Enabled option. The GPU is now more linked to the marketing organizational unit, and you can see that the GPU icon is great. The second option is to delete the GPU from under the marketing organizational unit. I will right-click and select Delete. I get this message. Do you want to delete this link? And it explicitly informs me that this will not delete the GPU itself. It will only remove the link. If I click OK, you can see that the GPU disappeared under the marketing organizational unit, but it still exists under the finance organizational unit and under the group policy objects container. If you want to delete a GPU completely, you have to do it from the group policy objects container. I will right-click on the GPU, then select Delete. I get a warning message. Do you want to delete this GPU and all links to it in this domain? This will not delete links in other domains. I click Yes. Now you can see that the GPU has been deleted from under the group policy objects container and is now more linked to the finance organizational unit. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. In this video, we are